Let's talk about setting up or designing and architecting Falcon Next-Gen SIEM solution for your customer of any size, scale, and complexity. It hardly makes any difference because the steps will remain the same. Also, I have already downloaded the latest version of this guide, which is Proof Your SOC, a migration guide from legacy to next-gen SIEM with CrowdStrike. Now, when it says legacy, it doesn't mean it is talking about really a legacy SIEM and SOAR solution. It basically provides you migration approach, the understanding that you would need to migrate from your existing SIEM solution to CrowdStrike NG-SIEM. Your existing SIEM solution could be cloud native also, which is Microsoft Sentinel, Google SecOps. It could be Elastic Log Stack, Logdash Kibana, ELK Stack from AWS. It could be Splunk QRadar, Logarithm, Alert Logic, Securonics. It could be any SIEM and SOAR solution. For CrowdStrike, they all are legacy because they are not using machine learning based threat intelligence model. They're not, they are not AI driven, and they do not have automation capabilities inbuilt in the solution right from day one. They somehow acquired automation capabilities. For example, pick up any SIEM and SOAR solution, you will notice that for automation, they either introduced it at a later point in time, probably after a couple of years of that SIEM solution in existence, or they acquired a company, white labeled it, added it as an automation layer. So Splunk has Phantom, same is the case with QRadar, same is the case with Microsoft. They came up with Logic Apps and then they integrated Logic Apps with Microsoft Sentinel. Google, acquired Simplify, Mendine, and from there they get threat intelligence and automation capabilities, which they integrated to their solution, which is Backstory or Chronicle or SecOps unified console that we know today. So every solution either procured automation capabilities late at a later point in time, or they basically built it in-house, developed it, but they did not integrate it from day one. While CrowdStrike is a next-gen SIEM, they included automation capabilities right from day one, and this solution was built on the top of AI. So it's pure play AI integrated solution. That's the reason they call it next-gen SIEM. So for any other SIEM and SOAR solution, it's legacy for CrowdStrike. Now in this guide, you will see that why do you need to transform your SOC, Security Operations Center? Why is it needed considering the current cybersecurity threat landscape? What are the downsides of using a legacy SIEM and benefits of using Falcon Next-Gen SIEM? So you see the comparison table, then you see additional benefits that it brings on the table. Then it talks about migration phases, that if you're planning to migrate from Microsoft Sentinel to CrowdStrike NG-SIEM, this would involve 5 phases: prepare, onboard, develop content, validate functionality, and operate. And before you operate, you will run both the solutions in parallel. Once you are confident of CrowdStrike NG-SIEM capability, you will perform a cutover, and then you finally are operating CrowdStrike NG-SIEM and optimizing it from time to time. So these are 5 phases that it basically talks about. And for each phase, it basically talks about what are the areas that you primarily need to look into, that you need to focus, how it is related to the existing SIEM and SOAR solution versus what you are going to onboard to. All that it basically talks about. So for prepare phase, onboarding data phase, how do you onboarding the data part, develop content, which is creating detection rules, validate functionality, which is where you run a test, you run the solution, in parallel with test subjects or test use cases. All that in the end, how do you basically perform a cutover and be 100% onboarded to CrowdStrike Next-Gen Falcon SIEM. So it basically shows you migration checklist also. Now this document serves as a starting point when you are, building a project plan, when you are planning to get into a discussion with a customer who is willing to migrate to next-gen SIEM from an existing SIEM and SOAR solution that they're using. So after reading this document, you have a fair idea in terms of whether CrowdStrike provides a tool that will automatically take your existing detection rules as input, let's say KQL queries as input, and it will generate the corresponding CQL queries or log scale query language. So it answers that question. It answers the question whether CrowdStrike has the capability to scan your existing SIEM solution, look for all the security monitoring use cases, and and basically suggest you the corresponding security monitoring use cases for CrowdStrike, whether it can convert or transform existing, Splunk query language, Splunk processing language, or QRadar query language, or Elastic SIEM query language, or Microsoft Sentinel query language to CrowdStrike query language. It answers all those questions. So I would request or recommend you all to go through this documentation during the weekdays, from tomorrow till next Saturday when we start our session. So please go through this document. This will provide you a lot of insights and probably answer most of your questions that you have in mind as we speak today. And if there is any question that this document cannot answer, let me know. I will probably share some resources that I have put together over the last couple of years while working with CrowdStrike NG SIEM while supporting customers or while helping customers to migrate from legacy to CrowdStrike. So I'll probably share some documentation with you, anything that I can customize and make sure that it does not violate non-disclosure agreement that I signed with my customers. I would be more than willing to share it with you. So that's about the guide which I was talking about. You will see this guide uploaded on our Google Drive today itself, along with session recordings. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about setting up Falcon Next-Gen SIEM, which is very important from architecture perspective. As I said, these are the things which are not included in the exam because their objective is for you to understand directly whether you know how to navigate in the console, whether you know all the options in Next-Gen SIEM, whether you can configure those options. They do not expect you anything above and beyond. But trust me, in the real world, you will be expected to know all of it because that's how your journey starts, your customer journey starts, or even in the interviews, this is what you will be expected to know. No interviewer will directly start to ask technical questions. They would want to understand if you had been into engineering role, if you had been involved into migration projects or design and architecture projects, whether you have fundamental knowledge of the product, whether you know the building blocks of the project, whether you understand the technical terminologies or the design and architecture aspects of the product. That is the first thing that they would expect you to know. If you're appearing for SOC, then they would expect you to know whether you know how to triage, investigate, remediate an incident, whether you know MITRE attack framework, whether you know attack IQ framework, whether you know how to perform correlation, whether you have knowledge of each and every module which is part of investigate in CrowdStrike. That's what they would expect you to know. They would expect you to know that you should understand writing CQL from scratch. You should understand the building blocks or different fields which are available. So depending on the role that you are applying for, you will be asked questions accordingly, or you will be expected to have that knowledge. Since we are doing CCSE, which is SIEM engineering, we are basically talking about design and architecture. So let's talk about design and architecture part, that how do you set up Falcon Next-Gen SIEM? Now, since Falcon Next-Gen SIEM is cloud native, it saves you from the hassle of procuring hardware, configuring that hardware in high availability mode, and then downloading the binaries for CrowdStrike NG SIEM, which is similar to Splunk Enterprise Security, wherein you download the binaries and you deploy it on your on-premises infrastructure. And you configure the infrastructure in high availability, fault tolerance, scalability mode, so that as and when the load volume increases, the security monitoring use cases increases, the number of end users trying to connect to the dashboard increases, your infrastructure can also scale in parallel in conjunction to that increase. CrowdStrike is saving you from that part. So we don't need to discuss about the hardware and software requirements, which you would do in other use cases, in other SIEM and SOAR solutions. You don't need to bother about hardware and software requirements. You don't need to bother about infrastructure configurations. You don't need to bother about the licensing part, because that licensing is something that is already discussed and agreed with CrowdStrike by the customer, or you could probably participate in those discussions. You don't need to bother about any of this, which means you're saved from this. You're saved from this because CrowdStrike provides you the solution in SaaS model. It's a software as a service. offering. So NG SIEM is your part of SaaS offering, which means the solution is already available in the cloud. Just go ahead and subscribe the solution, and you will have access to NG SIEM console. So it's a SaaS offering mode. Now, when I say that subscribe to the solution, how are you subscribing to the solution, or what license you are taking for the solution? So for that, we basically have a couple of licensing methods which are available. So what are those licensing methods that are available to you? Basically, the subscription or licensing methods. So what you need to know, you basically need to have access to Falcon Insight XDR. This is the product offering in the backend that they know. Insight XDR. Insight XDR combines the EDR plus SIEM and SOAR capability. It combines EDR plus SIEM and SOAR capability. And this Insight XDR is also available with Falcon Enterprise license, wherein you get 10 GB per day log ingestion with 7 days of retention. That's what you need to have at a bare minimum in order to subscribe to CrowdStrike NG SIEM. There is another module which is available, which is Falcon Next-Gen SIEM that you need to have access to, or Falcon Complete. Falcon Complete is their comprehensive bundle from CrowdStrike, which basically combines multiple modules of Falcon. It includes exposure management, identity threat detection and response, cloud security, which is CSPM and CNAP module. It includes a prompt security module also. They've started to include that. So it includes multiple modules. So if you have access to Falcon Complete, you will also have access to Falcon Next-Gen SIEM. So that's one thing that you need to make sure that you have access to from licensing perspective. Then comes access, the identity and access management part. Now, from identity and access management perspective, in order to set up next-gen SIEM, you should have one of these roles, which is Falcon administrator, which is the main role or the super admin role for Falcon line of products. You should be Falcon administrator. You should have NG SIEM admin role. These are the bare minimum roles that you need to have access to: NG SIEM, administrative role, or NG SIEM security lead role. This is another role which is available. If you are not doing all the deployments from scratch, if you are basically, if the customer has done the initial deployment and you just need to configure the log ingestion, you need to configure the detection rules, you need to configure the Fusion SOAR workflows, then NG SIEM security lead role will also help you. However, for Fusion workflows, you need separate capability, right? And then if you are one of the SOC analyst whose job is to investigate, triage, and detect, or make use of CQL, make use of dashboards and reporting, then you need to have NG SIEM analyst role. So these are the roles that you need to have. Falcon administrator would contain everything, and trust me, no customer would be willing to give you Falcon administrator role, because customers would expect you to follow least privilege principle as an architect. So do not ask for NG SIEM administrator. If it is about deploying, designing, setting up, Falcon NG SIEM, ask them either for NG SIEM administrator role instead of Falcon admin, or NG SIEM security lead role. Because with security lead role, you will be able to do most of the configurations. In fact, I'll talk about user management, then you will see the value proposition of the permissions which are there in this role, right? So you should have one of these roles. Then CrowdStrike, this NG SIEM module is available in all the clouds of CrowdStrike. It is available in all clouds, CrowdStrike Cloud Data Centers, which is CrowdStrike Cloud DC. It is available in all the CrowdStrike data centers, which is your US1, US2, your US government, as well as in other data centers. So you can start this solution from anywhere. Now, why I'm sharing this information? Because this directly relates to data residency and compliance. Depending on the log sources or the data sources, the geography in which they are available, you will need to make sure that you follow data residency and localization laws, if there is any, to make sure that you are storing the logs in the same geography. If the logs contain any PII, PHI, any confidential data, confidential information, then it becomes more important. So you will need to make sure that you follow this, that think of a log repository, think of a location where you have majority of your log data sources are. If you are a global company, even though you would have a fair idea by running the initial brainstorming exercise or discovery exercise with the customer, you will have a fair idea. If the customer has an existing SIEM solution, you will know the events per second information, you will have log ingestion data, and you will have a fair idea in terms of log bifurcation, that what is the significant amount of logs coming from which location. So that location will probably become your log scale log repository cloud data center. So you will pick up that location. If the logs are coming from multiple locations, CrowdStrike also gives you the capability to have log scale log repository configured across multiple locations in the backend, so that logs from a specific location will only store in that location. So for example, logs from Asia Pacific will store into Asia Pacific data centers. Logs from Europe will store into Europe data centers, because Europe has GDPR and they are stringent privacy laws. They would not allow you to store any log that belongs to the citizens of European Union outside of the geographical boundaries of European Union. So that discussion you can have with customer, and to satisfy your needs, CrowdStrike provides NG SIEM solution from all the cloud data centers. So you should not face any issue in from that perspective. Now, then comes, so once you're done with all of this, once you have access to CrowdStrike NG SIEM console with either Falcon administrator, NG SIEM administrator role, once your customer has already, or you have already discussed and concluded on the licensing strategy and identifying the log storage location, then you basically log into the console and you start with data onboarding. You start with data onboarding. As part of data onboarding in CrowdStrike, data onboarding, when I basically say, it means log ingestion. Data onboarding is log ingestion. So in order to perform log ingestion, we have different methods. We basically, when it comes to log ingestion, we have first party data sources and we have third party data sources. So you will need to identify what your first party data sources are, what your third party data sources are. Now, in a nutshell, at a very high level, understand first party data sources are CrowdStrike native data sources. CrowdStrike native. When I say CrowdStrike native, it basically means data sources on which Falcon sensor is already installed. For example, your endpoints, desktop, laptop servers, they already have Falcon sensor installed on them. So it constitutes first party data source. Your ITDR module, if you're using identity security module from CrowdStrike, it means that you already have your identity information available to CrowdStrike. If you're using CSPM module of CrowdStrike, which is CrowdStrike Cloud Security module, you already have that information available from CrowdStrike. So that's your first party data sources, basically the data sources that are known and native to CrowdStrike. So that's first party data sources. Then comes third party data sources. What are third party data sources? Data sources which are outside of the visibility of CrowdStrike. Data sources where you have not deployed any CrowdStrike Falcon sensor or any CrowdStrike capability on it. For example, your networking devices, which is firewall, VPN devices, web application firewall, IDS, IPS. Those devices doesn't have CrowdStrike deployed on them, so they are network. So they are third-party data sources. Your third-party SaaS applications, which are generating logs, and you basically want to send those logs from those applications to CrowdStrike, or third-party security solutions, TP security solutions, security tools such as, let's say, vulnerability management detection and response solution. We did talk about Qualys yesterday. So what if you want to ingest logs from Qualys to CrowdStrike NGC so that you can analyze if there has been any sudden spike in vulnerabilities across the environment or across critical host. So EDR, you can send EDR logs also if you're using Palo Alto Cortex XDR, if you're using Trend Micro, if you're using Semantic, if you're using Defender for endpoint, they become your third-party data sources. Any ITSM solution, for example, ITSM, ServiceNow, Jira, BMC Remedy, you want to send logs to CrowdStrike for analysis, you can send the logs from there, right? Your cloud environments, CSP, cloud service providers, such as Azure, AWS, GCP, OCI, etc. You want to send logs from these environments. They have nothing to do with CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has no visibility to them. So that becomes your third-party data sources. So after you are done with the licensing part, after you are done with designing and discussing on the log storage part, that is where you start with the log onboarding. So if you are migrating from an existing SIEM and SOAR solution, you would have collected the data in terms of what are various log sources or data sources already in use by a customer. You would have a list of that. And from that list, you can identify you can probably do the rating in terms of what is most critical, what is medium critical, what is least critical. And you can probably start data onboarding. You can probably start with low hanging fruit, pick up what is least critical so that you will at least get a glimpse of how CrowdStrike works. Your customer has a glimpse of how CrowdStrike works. So you can start with low hanging fruit, which is least critical data source, start onboarding those data sources into CrowdStrike and have them simultaneously send data to CrowdStrike so that you can build security monitoring use cases against those data sources and have parallel ingestion to your existing solution as well as to CrowdStrike. So this is how you need to start your journey. Now, for some data sources, you will be quick to perform the ingestion because CrowdStrike will provide you out-of-the-box connector. But for some data sources, you will not have out-of-the-box connector. So when it comes to data sources onboarding, we are basically dealing with either CrowdStrike, either native data connector, which is available in CrowdStrike, or you will need to write a custom data connector and custom parser for it. So if there is any data source, let's say you have a legacy application, in-house developed application, and that application generates log, and you need to analyze those logs because application is mission critical to your business. You need to analyze logs in terms of who all are logging into that application. Whether that application is generating any security misconfiguration logs. You need to send them all to CrowdStrike. And CrowdStrike doesn't have an out-of-the-box data connector for it. So in that case, you will need to write a custom data connector and custom parser to have that application transfer the logs. The custom parser will parse those logs, normalize them, and the data connector will facilitate the connectivity between the application and CrowdStrike Cloud, CrowdStrike NGC. So this is another consideration that you need to take into when you are doing the data onboarding part. So once this data onboarding part is complete, definitely this part will also involve some unknown, some roadblocks that you will come across because you don't have a solution that you can input your existing log sources and it will generate the corresponding output log sources for CrowdStrike. So you will come across some unknowns, you will come across some roadblocks, and for that, you will do your own research. If required, you will take help from AI or you will connect with CrowdStrike support, or CrowdStrike will basically assign a vendor or partner or its CrowdStrike partner who has expert knowledge of performing those activities of dealing with those scenarios in the past. So that's how you will navigate to this path. So you are basically performing data onboarding. Once this data onboarding is complete, you will basically validate that. So data onboarding is complete. you will validate log ingestion. As part of validation, you will ensure that EPS or ingestion per day volume remains the same. There is no significant difference. Ingestion per day volume. It should not happen that your existing SIEM and SOAR solution had, let's say, 15 GB of log ingestion per day on an average, but after you onboard all the log data sources, it turns out to be 100 GB per day. Your customer would not approach that behavior, would not appreciate or approve that behavior. So you need to basically validate log ingestion, and as part of this validation, you need to perform log enrichment, log tuning, log filtering, and also, if it is about security, then you need to perform redacting of PII information, etc. So as part of validation phase, you're performing all of these activities, which is again a subphase within the data onboarding. So you're performing the validation at the same time. Once this validation is complete, then you basically move on to the next phase, which is your detection engineering. This is where you are writing security monitoring use cases. Now, this information is very much available in the guide that I was just showing you. You can refer to that guide that will guide you with the stages that you need to go further. So probably I will come back to this document. I will just save this Word document here and come back to this document when we reach to this stage, rather explaining all the stages today, and then you will probably forget it. So I will just save this document here, and we will now start with this part, which is the data onboarding part. And before data onboarding, we will also look at the user management part. So we'll first see, how do we get access to CrowdStrike console? How do we give access to our team members? Because you're not the single person taking care of the entire project. You have team members also. So while you have discussion with your customer on design and architecture aspects, you will have your team members to do some initial activities or some initial configurations. So let's look at user management part, and then let's spend some time here on data onboarding. At least we will spend two weekends on data onboarding, because we are going to perform rigorous data onboarding. We will look into multiple data sources or all the possibilities that you will find in a corporate environment with limited capability that I have available in the lab. So since it is your responsibility to bring in data sources, to bring in your own infrastructure, so you will have by full freedom to onboard any data source that you wish to based on the availability of that data source. So let's focus on these activities. And once we are done with this, we'll come back to this document probably 2-3 weekends from now, and then we will move on to the next phase, which is writing detection use cases or identifying detection use cases, and then writing corresponding queries or log scale queries for those detection use cases, or creating rules for those detection use cases. Let's navigate to user management now.